Patient Voices is proudly supported by sponsors who have no editorial control over the content. Hi, everyone. I'm Yvonne Diaz, and I'm a co-founder of Oncogene Cancer Research, and I'm really pleased to be joined today by an amazing patient advocate called Mel Irwin, who's living with stage 4 EGFR lung cancer here in London. Mel, welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So, Mel, you were diagnosed in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. So I want to get straight to it and just have you take us through what was going on and what made you think that something was wrong.
So I had COVID in March, one of the first people probably to have COVID, actually. And we knew it was COVID because later I did an antibody test. And so we knew I definitely had it. And by about June, July, I developed what we still believe was long COVID. So couldn't walk to the end of the street, felt like my nervous system was not firing as it normally did. Really wasn't functioning at all was not well. And I knew something was deeply wrong. Because long COVID was being talked about in the press, I went straight to my GP and said, help, something isn't right with me. The first GP I spoke to actually said, what do you want me to do about it? And the second GP very wisely and confidently said, I'm sending you for an X-ray and a blood test. I don't expect to find anything. So off I go. He called me back the same day, actually. And I remember his words really clearly. He said, your bloods are fine, but there is a mass on your left lung. And because I'd had COVID, and because COVID was such an unknown, everyone around me was saying, it's obviously COVID. COVID has left its little legacy. It's left you a little present in your lung. But I did ask him, could it be lung cancer? And he said, yeah, it could be. So that was my first inkling of what might be ahead. And we all know this, it's like how it felt is we'd got this beautiful garden like everybody in COVID who had a garden. We've been growing things. It was full of color and joy and light. And it felt like a meteor had landed slap bang in the middle of my garden, an explosion. And I was at the bottom of the hole and everybody else was in the garden. So I was totally smashed. My life felt smashed. And I went through all the tests that you would normally go through, but everything was done on the phone when I had results or conversations. So I didn't see anybody in person. Was diagnosed in August 2020, and I had lung surgery on the day after my 53rd birthday. So I had half a lung removed and then 4 rounds of, actually for me, very brutal chemotherapy. I know everybody responds differently, but for me, it was annihilating. And then a month of radio. So that was back, I finished in 2021.
My God. So what a whirlwind to just go from, it's probably COVID to you have lung cancer.
Yeah.
Right. And then to find yourself very quickly going into all of this setting. So you described a little bit about how you were feeling. And in those days, you couldn't even go in with someone. Was that, quite difficult for you?
So isolating. I mean, I think is one of the reasons I show up as an advocate, because I went through all of my appointments, surgery, chemo, everything on my own. My partner, Sarah, couldn't accompany me to anything. And also the National Health Service was in its own existential crisis, right? It was under enormous pressure. The burden of COVID was enormous. So I think care wasn't what it would normally be at that time. The ability to listen to people, the ability to pay attention, none of the outreach services were available. So it was a brutal time. And interestingly, I never had a biopsy before my surgery. So they were quite clear that tumor was a tumor and not a mass, actually.
Did you know anything about biomarker testing? And because we did say that you have EGFR lung cancer. So how did you find out? Had you heard about biomarker testing? Because that's something when we're diagnosed, we don't expect these diseases, right?
Yeah.
And we're in the middle of lives. We've always been healthy for the most part. I know you were very healthy. And then here you find out these words, and the whole process is very mysterious.
Yeah, it is mysterious. And I think also if we look back 5.5 years when I was diagnosed, there was not as much information either on social media or anywhere really about mutation-driven lung cancers. So you guys weren't around. I had other routes to kind of think about what my diagnosis was, but they didn't really flag it with me because it wouldn't have changed my treatment plan. So I do remember at some point the oncologist saying, "You are EGFR positive," but it meant nothing to me. And I was so sick, I couldn't hold the letters in my head. EG, what? F, what? What does it mean? And because there was no associated action with my mutation, it didn't seem relevant to me at that time. The drug I'm now available through the NHS. Yes, I had a mutation, but what the treatment I had was standard lung cancer treatment, which is surgery, cisplatin, and the other one, and then radiotherapy. Vinoralbin, there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
so that's what I would have had if I didn't have a mutation. So in 5.5 years, we've come a really long way in how we experience our diagnosis and what a biomarker is and what the options are and there are options actually for EGFR now. So that the process has changed, I suspect, enormously for patients in that time.
Right. And so you were diagnosed in August. You went through this quite full-on treatment with surgery and then chemoradiation. How long did that take? So by what month were you finished? And then what happened after that? I also want to talk about your surgery.
Yes.
What was that like to go through? And what was your recovery like?
Mhm.
Did you receive any mental support? Sorry, a million questions there.
Yeah, let's start with the surgery because that's the sort of chronological order. So surgery, obviously I went in on my own. I cried on the way to the hospital. I cried as I went in. I sobbed when I met the anaesthetist and the surgeon. And I remember sitting on the edge of the bed on the operating table and crying. And I didn't have my glasses on because I'd taken them off me like they do before you have surgery. And I remember the anaesthetist just held me. She was super kind, but it was incredibly terrifying and isolating. I didn't respond at all well to surgery and post-surgery, partly probably because I had long COVID as well. So my body was already misfiring, I suspect. But I got through it, as we do, and it's brutal. But because I knew it was getting the tumor out of my body, I was absolutely committed to having that surgery as quickly as humanly possible and moving on with chemo. And I actually didn't know at that time that I was going to be having chemo in the first place. In fact, they only found that out afterwards because they biopsied me after surgery, not before surgery. So I didn't know that I would be having chemotherapy until a few weeks after my surgery. And that was probably the hardest moment for me. And I think emotionally and mentally, I really dipped because for me, chemotherapy was terrifying. Terrifying.
Right. Of course. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing. Like you said, it is amazing what we're willing to tolerate because you think you're working towards this cure, but then being told later about the need for chemo. Were you ever told your stage at any point? And I think your biomarker didn't get communicated until after this whole process. Wasn't that right?
Exactly. When the oncologist called me 2 weeks after surgery to tell me that they had found activity in, I think it's called station something or other. So it was in an area of my chest called like station 18 and various nodules that there was spread, that I was then 2A. I was diagnosed at stage 2A, and we were still talking about curative intent. So I don't think it ever occurred to me that I wouldn't be cured, weirdly, because you're in this sort of altered reality where every day is just a day you have to handle, you have to deal with. And I was in such shock, I think, that I couldn't really think or feel in the way that I normally think or feel. I just went through the motions with terror, yes, isolated, yes, but knowing I had no choice. This is the path.
Yeah.
This is the path to healing. This is the path to life. This is the path to eventual recovery. I was too overcome to reach out to anybody. I didn't reach out to any of the charities. I didn't look at social media. I was just surviving. I was just surviving. And once I'd finished my treatment in February, I then had a year and a half of living without cancer, but still with the after effects of cancer. And I really do believe that the end of treatment marks the beginning of recovery, and recovery is long and recovery is hard. And it's the bit where you still need the love and the support. But for understandable reasons, lots of people think, oh, she's okay now. She's finished treatment.
Right.
She's fine.
Yeah.
Look at her. But actually, I was not fine. I was far from fine, actually.
So much of what you're saying is completely resonating with my own experience, because I also remember when you're in the middle of like what is essentially a medical emergency, I don't think you can really process your emotions. So you're just having to get through this, all the functional things like have surgery and in your case go through chemo and radiation. You're just in get it through mode. And then it's after when all of it hits you. So after this curative treatment, did you just try and get back to life? You returned to work? 'Cause we didn't really talk about life before lung cancer. So, okay, now I'm done. And like you said, you didn't reach out to the patient community in any way. And I've seen that in other patients who just also don't want cancer to be their life.
Mm-mm.
You just want to get back to,
Yeah.
right, whatever that is,
Yeah.
and then have this be fine point.
Quite. I wasn't ready to engage with anything to do with cancer. Actually, I wanted cancer to do one. Go, I'm done. I'm not interested. I'm not fully aware of how to engage with the cancer community yet. But actually, returning to work was hard for me. I had a full-time job beforehand. I was the director of an organization. I loved my job. I worked really long hours. But post-treatment, I didn't go back to work until June. And even then, only half days at a time, and then 1 day a week, and eventually 3 days a week. But it was overwhelming. I found it utterly overwhelming. And I think what we need at that time is so much mental, emotional support, occupational health, an environment where it's okay to talk about cancer. But I was working remotely. And so that kind of connection with colleagues wasn't available to me. It's just, this is how things were. It's tough.
That's it.
It's just full stop. And although now I live my life with va-va-vam and optimism, and I'm buoyant, I'm kind of, in some ways, I'm much more reconciled to living with cancer. I'm sort of embracing it. It's like it's my new job, and I've signed up for it, and I am an advocate, and I am energized. And the hard bit was the first 2 years, but 5.5 years down the line, I now have stage 4 lung cancer. And I inhabit that space with a lot more confidence and optimism and commitment and belonging, a sense of belonging, than I did when I was newly diagnosed.
I can imagine you as an employee, because if you were as good a director as you are a patient advocate, you'd be amazing, because you're so engaged and so delightful to everyone and bring a lot of hope, but yet realism into it as well. Now, I want to jump forward quickly because you were then diagnosed stage 4. So here you are happily thinking, I put a fine point on this whole moment of my life. So what happened next? Was it just surveillance scan that brought it up, or were you having symptoms again?
Good question. So I didn't have my first surveillance scan until 6 months after my treatment. So bye-bye, Mel. End of treatment. Off I went into the wilderness, and no contact with my hospital for another 6 months. So that was really mind-blowing for me, because we get used to that contact. We live there. It becomes a home, and then suddenly it's not anymore. So after that 6-month scan, I then had them every 3 months. And a year and a half after treatment, they found 10 tiny, minuscule nodules across both lungs. But they were so small, they weren't able to biopsy them. I paid for my own ctDNA test. Nothing showed up, because we know that I now know that if the cancer is confined to your lungs, it doesn't necessarily show in the blood test, but it was worth a try. And I lived like that for 2 years. So I had this kind of sort of little constellation of sparkling tumors. And I used to look after them. I was like, it's okay, guys. I know you're probably cancer, but just stay calm. I wasn't kind of fighting them. It's like, they're here. There's 10 of them. They're part of me. The rest of my body doesn't have cancer, just this bit. So I knew it was coming. And I lived in this sort of no man's land between stage 2A and stage 4, where I couldn't go, hi, I have cancer. I couldn't really join the cancer community because I didn't know that I had cancer, except I did, but I didn't. And once I was diagnosed, although there was a huge emotional moment of like, okay, here we go. It was then right, I've had this sort of job interview for cancer and I've passed it. And now I'm in the club. And then I went for it. Then I'm like, yes, this is my tribe. These are my people. I need information. I need connection. And I cannot bear injustice. I never have been able to. I couldn't bear it in my job. You know, we worked to teach every child to read, regardless of background or special need. And I feel like that about cancer too. So I needed to find the tribe, and I am so glad that I have. It's the most incredible cancer crew, and I engage every day with someone somewhere who has either lung cancer or has just been diagnosed with lung cancer or is living with it or is stage 4 or even other cancers, because we're all one community. We've got our specific cancers, but we're all one, really. We all know what it's like to be diagnosed, have treatment, the impact on our families, etc. So I now live with way more va-va-vam energy. I'm out, I guess. I'm out with cancer. I'm really happy to be out. I'm really happy to talk about it. So I live well, and I'm lucky because my drug, for me, isn't giving me that many side effects.
Wow. That is just amazing. I love hearing all of these words, and what a perspective, because moving to stage 4 is quite a big blow, but you've chosen to kind of try and frame it into what you do have now, right? I'm sure there are moments where you're not absolutely positive all the time, but this is quite remarkable, and I think will also inspire a lot of people. So we're going to leave part 1 here. So thank you so
Right.
much for
You're
your
welcome.
amazing diagnosis, and we're going to come back and pick up again on this whole section where you heard these words around stage 4, because that also frames where we go from here. So
Perfect.
thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.